Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Const. So let's give a standing ovation for our favorite old socialist.
As you may know, I asked Mr. Bezos to testify at this hearing. He declined my invitation, and that's too bad. Because if he was with us this morning, I would ask him the following question. And that is, Mr. Bezos, you are worth $182 billion. That's a B. 182 billion. You're the wealthiest person in the world. Why are you doing everything in your power to stop your workers in Bessemer, Alabama, from joining a union so that they can negotiate for better wages, better benefits, and better working conditions?
Nailed it. Bernie still got the game. This is the fight of our lifetimes. This is bigger than organizing one warehouse in Alabama. This is bigger than affirming the right to organize in one of those so-called right-to-work states where they still denounce legitimate union campaigns as the work of outside agitators. Bless their racist, anti-Semitic, xenophobic little hearts. And that's why the PRO Act is so important. Now, this is bigger. This is much, much bigger than all of that. This is the overdue showdown between the libertarian bro culture of Silicon Valley and, well, the rest of us. This is the moment we draw the line and say to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and even to Jeff Bezos, being rich doesn't make you right. Consumers spending their money with you is not an affirmation of your moral value. Sales are not votes. Winning in the marketplace is not the same as winning an election, whether for government office or for union status. But all these ideas are products of one of the most toxic strands of American capitalist philosophy. Check that. I won't even honor it by calling it a philosophy. The toxic strand of self-justification that the billionaires in Silicon Valley have used to justify their disproportionate wealth and bamboozle others into believing they were somehow new and different. They adored Ayn Rand. They bought her bull about the individualists because they were the individualists. That was not old-fashioned exploitation. That's not what this was. This was the internet, the digital revolution. It was all new. Well, crap. This is Carnegie and Ford hiding behind algorithms. And I'm so proud of the food and commercial workers for taking on this fight to Amazon. And so many others are fighting by their side. Sarah Nelson, the president of the CWA-AFA, the American Flight Attendants Workers, the official labor leader of the Nomiki Show, she was in Bessemer yesterday and sent this back.
This is the Amazon warehouse. And it's got big vote signs everywhere. The parking lot is empty today, but normally there'd be cars and activity everywhere here. They let people have the day off and paid them, you know, because it's the end of the union election, and so the employer wants to make sure that they know they're taking care of their people. Even though in Birmingham you can't even rent an apartment for $15 an hour, this is the mailbox that Amazon set up, even though they weren't supposed to. The NLRB told them they weren't supposed to, and then they put it in this tent, like right in front of the front entrance for the workers. Speak for yourself. Mail your ballot here. Major violation. Major violation. And it's still here. It's still here. But the workers I talked to today are like, you know, they're not having it.
Go, Sarah. You know, workers can win this vote at Amazon, and we can finally bury Ayn Rand and restore working people to their rightful place. And with the PRO Act, which will hopefully pass in the Senate if we pressure our Democrats to vote for it, that is how we will make sure that workers have the right to organize in every single state, even if it's a right to work state in this country. And it will make sure that there are fair elections, labor elections, and that these types of violations won't happen anymore. So go support the PRO Act, urge your senators to support the PRO Act, make phone calls, send out the memes, do what you have to do online, make the phone calls. The PRO Act will transform labor in this country.
But it's not divided between red and blue. It's not divided between big cities and small towns. Virginia is divided between the haves and the have-nots. One side sends their kids to choice private schools, while the rest of us send our kids to schools that are underfunded and crumbling. One side can afford concierge service from their doctors, while we're lucky to see a doctor at all. And when COVID-19 hit, they got massive taxpayer-funded bailouts for their businesses, and we had to make do with thoughts and prayers.
The more than 760,000 Virginians left unemployed by the pandemic.
For too long, we've listened to career politicians and pundits tell us that there is no other way, but no more. In this primary, we can finally pick a governor that will fight for the rest of us, for the teachers and nurses, for shipbuilders and students struggling to make tuition, for everyone with a stack of bills on the kitchen table waiting to get paid. I'm running for governor so the rest of us can finally get what we need. So we can get what we deserve. I'm Lee Carter, candidate for governor, and I approve this message, because a vote for me is a vote for the rest of us.
Welcome back to the Nomiki Show, and welcome back, Delegate Carter. Lee Carter is, of course, he represents the 50th District in the Virginia House of Delegates, and he is running for governor of Virginia. So great that we finally got you on. I was so thrilled when you announced. I was like, we need him on immediately.
Thank you so much for having me. How you doing today?
Doing wonder, as great as you can be in the midst of this chaos.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, Virginia's got like such a strange system to me. I feel. Can you explain just how this gubernatorial race is playing out? Like who's in it? Just sort of the logistics before we get to your candidacy.
Yeah. So first of all, Virginia is one of only 2 states that has major elections in odd numbered years, which is a voter suppression tactic. Conservatives long ago knew that if they got their elections out of sync with the federal elections, that fewer people would vote in them. So that's one of the things that makes this odd, is that it's just us that has a competitive gubernatorial election. But the field right now, so we have a very crowded Democratic primary. You have me, obviously, and then you have former Governor Terry McAuliffe, which he's running for a non-consecutive term. Another weird thing about Virginia is that our governors are limited to only 1 term at a time. You can have as many terms as you want, but none of them can be back to back. And so he's running to be only the 2nd governor ever to get a 2nd term. The first was actually a segregationist named Mills Godwin. So we've got former Governor McAuliffe running. We have a longtime member of the state Senate, Senator Jennifer McClellan, running. We have a former delegate who got elected in 2017 with me, former delegate Jennifer Carroll Foy, and we have the current Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, all running for governor. So it's a very, very crowded field on the Democratic side. There's even more chaos on the Republican side that I can get into if you want to give me time.
This is the junkie show, so yes, please.
So on the Republican side, first of all, they've had a hard time even picking their nominating method. What do you mean by that?
So
the parties are allowed to choose their nominating method. The Democrats have chosen a state-run primary. Mm-hmm. The Republicans were trying to have a convention, and then they were told that they were not allowed to have a convention because of COVID restrictions. So they decided to have what's called an unassembled caucus, which is where there's essentially just one voting site. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to do that at a university in Lynchburg, but they didn't ask the university first. And so then that plan got rejected, and now they've got this weird hybrid unassembled caucus with 30 or 40 some odd voting sites, which is still far too few for a Commonwealth of 8.5 million people. But they have a crowded field over there as well. They have a former Speaker of the House running for governor. Their front runner is actually someone who describes herself as Trump in heels. And she, took part in the insurrection on January 6th. And I had to ask the Attorney General whether or not she was even qualified to serve in office under the 14th Amendment. And he basically said, well, that's up to the courts.
So she's being investigated right now?
I'd be shocked if she wasn't under criminal investigation for it. I mean, she had members of her personal bodyguard that were arrested for their actions at the Capitol. They were arrested for their actions at the Capitol while out on bail after being arrested interfering with vote counts in Pennsylvania. It is just absolutely wild what's going on here in Virginia, and it's a complete free for all.
Is the situation on the Republican side an indication of the state of Virginia in terms of red versus blue? I mean, if the leader of the Republican side is a Trump person, whereas, that's probably not going to win the group. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I mean, I'm thinking like for folks who aren't aware, Northern Virginia is very much like the Washington outskirts. It's the Beltway. And so those folks aren't going to vote for Trump. They're more likely to vote for the Democratic nominee or Trump's person in heels. I mean, is this sort of an indicator of like a failing Republican Party in Virginia and maybe even nationally?
Well, their last nominee for U.S. Senate was a guy named Corey Stewart, who was best known for his racist policies in Prince William County, which, half of my district is in Prince William County. But he also, a lot of people don't realize this, he was sort of the crystal that everything coalesced around in Charlottesville leading up to the Nazi attack.
Wow.
He was going down and holding these torchlight rallies in Charlottesville around that monument of Robert E. Lee.
Oh my God.
April, May, June of 2017. And then there was the big Nazi attack in August, which had the same method and just much, much larger attendance. And so, the Republican Party of Virginia has been off the rails for a while. They have not won a statewide election since 2009.
Oh, wow.
And they're, frankly, their chances of ever winning a statewide election again are very, very low, barring some sort of massive political realignment. The problem is that we're overdue for a massive political realignment here in Virginia. And you'll have to excuse the train sounds. I live in Manassas. It's a railway town. I don't know if you can hear the horn or not.
we love the trains. It's all good.
But so, Virginia's political history is one where you have this very ossified status quo, right? Where nothing changes for decades and decades and decades. And then all of a sudden there's a clean break, right? There's this massive surge of backlash against the status quo. And sometimes it goes in very positive directions, like with the readjuster movement, with the candidacy of Henry Howell, who was a lieutenant governor for 2 years and ran for governor 3 times and almost won. He actually almost won against Mills Godwin, the segregationist that I was talking about earlier. And sometimes it goes in very negative ways, like Mills Godwin.
Right.
Those two things tend to bubble up at the same exact time, and you get elections where you're competing against, a positive populism of people that want to do the people's work and break from the good old boys network and, make the Commonwealth more small d democratic and make our economy work for more people. And you also get this sort of negative populism where it's all about scapegoats and racism and, this person is the cause of all your problems. And we're in that kind of moment right now. And my concern with this election is that, the Democratic Party nationally and in Virginia in particular seems ill-suited to deal with that kind of negative populism coming from the other side. And so, we can suppress it for a few elections, but eventually that dissatisfaction will bubble over, and we have to either give people a positive creative outlet for that populist energy and return the Commonwealth to a government of, by, and for the people, or deal with the violent, horrifying, racist consequences of not providing that constructive outlet. That's really the consequence of this election on both sides.
It's interesting because you do have these elections in off years, and you were elected in an off year. And I remember when, you made major news. It was very.
Wasn't trying to.
It was good though. It was good because I think you were the first, at least nationally recognized DSA member. elected after the primary, the presidential primary, of course, in 2016.
Yeah. And I was the first socialist elected to any office in Virginia in over 100 years.
That's amazing.
From my research, the last time I was able to find a socialist elected to any office was the mayor of Brookneal, Virginia, which had a population of like 900, and it was in 1916.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Quite a revival. But because of that, there's an opportunity, without giving away a playbook to your opponents, there's an opportunity when there is low turnout for people to organize and not rely, solely on, it does help sometimes, on mass media. And if you have that kind of integrated campaign model, which you clearly did, and I'm sure you're doing now, it feeds well with these populist movements, right? So, I'm looking at someone like a Terry McAuliffe, who, very charming guy. I've had drinks with him before. I'm sure you have too, or been around it. Very, very charming guy. He's definitely representative of the establishment. But my guess is he's probably going to rely on that like big statewide model that's less rooted in communities. So is this, sort of there's an opportunity here, given that, there is going to be low turnout, for someone like yourself to just really come in and fight to win. Right? Is that kind of how you're looking at it? And,
I don't mind playing with my cards face up. Right. So I'll just go ahead and talk about what we're going to be doing. Unlike the rest of the field, I understand that you're never going to raise more money than Terry McAuliffe. This is a guy who is personally tight with the Clinton family. This is a guy who his entire, the entire base of his power within the Democratic Party is that he raises a lot of money from massive corporations. Mm-hmm. And so if I were to come up with $10 million, he'd spend 20. If I came up with $100 million, he'd spend 200 million.
Right.
There's absolutely no way to outraise this guy. He has essentially unlimited money. The rest of the field is trying to play the big money game with him. And frankly, that's doomed to failure because it's his game. He will always win it. And so my strategy is not to try to raise more money than Terry McAuliffe. It's never going to happen. My strategy is to raise just enough money to get the word out there and to walk the walk and say, I'm fighting for the issues that you actually care about. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about them in a way that you're not used to hearing politicians talk about them, because it's not poll tested. It's not run through consultants. It's just me talking about the things that I want out of the Commonwealth. And that I'm going to fight for them. That I'm actually going to follow through because A, I have a record of doing just that. Damn the consequences. And B, my entire political career, I've never taken a single dime from any for-profit corporation or industry interest group. And I never will. Mm-hmm. And in a state with unlimited campaign contributions where
unreal. I can't believe that. Just let's pause for a second, digest that. Unlimited campaign. How is that possible?
Well, there's only 6 states that do it this way.
Pennsylvania is one, right?
I don't remember
Virginia,
the other 5.
Yeah, well,
I've been focused on this one.
That's good.
But, we had perfect example of this in 2019. There was a member of the House of Delegates, a libertarian right-winger who didn't turn his paperwork in on time for re-election and had to run a write-in campaign. But he funded his entire re-election campaign with a single check from an Illinois casino owner for $500,000.
Oh my God.
One check.
Unreal.
And, there's no prohibition on corporations giving directly to candidates. The only thing that they're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to accept contributions from foreign sources. But,
okay.
But
I think it's a federal law, though.
But if a multinational corporation has a U.S. subsidiary that's just a post office box in Delaware, that's fine. As long as it has the address in Delaware on it. Who cares? Right? Virginia has no rules.
Does that have anything to do with the fact that there's so much military presence? I'm just trying to think of military personnel. Obviously, the U.S. government has different offices situated in Virginia. Does that have anything to do with the military industrial complex?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're allowed to receive contributions from American citizens living abroad. We're allowed to receive contributions from green card holders that live here in the States. So I've gotten donations from people that are American citizens that live in Singapore or the Czech Republic or that have an APO or FPO address. So I don't really think that has anything to do with it. It's just that, Virginia's political class is just so tightly wound up with the business class in Virginia that they're really inseparable. And they just fundamentally, most of my colleagues don't see a problem with, for example, Dominion Energy, the regulated electric utility here, that has a monopoly license to do business through 70% of the Commonwealth. They don't see a problem with that monopoly directly funding the campaigns of members of the General Assembly when we in the General Assembly are the ones who appoint people to the State Corporation Commission, which is the body that's supposed to regulate them. Right. But there's something ideological that it just doesn't click, that's obviously bad.
Well, people don't want to face their own demons.
Yeah.
That is mind blowing. So the thing that I don't understand, though, is, Terry McAuliffe, prolific fundraiser, one of the best in history, close to the Clintons, but former head of the DNC.
But not very good at getting people to show up to vote. When he won in 2013, it was a record low turnout year.
Interesting.
He raises a lot of money and does not get people excited.
Interesting. So that leads to my question is, how are these other establishment types, how do they have the courage to run against him? Because, it's different if you're progressive running against the establishment, but they usually make sure that the field's clear or maybe they will eventually. But is there some sort of dynamic happening that we're not aware of?
Well, he and I both entered the race fairly late. And when most of the rest of the field was declaring their candidacies, it was expected that he would get a job in the Biden administration. And so he's actually the one that sort of upset the plan by running for governor again. So, I do kind of feel bad for some of the more establishment aligned candidates who didn't expect to have him in the field and were operating as though he was not going to run again. And then all of a sudden, he jumps in with $6 million cash. If you're trying to play that big money game and a whale comes in after you, you're screwed through no fault of your own. But again, I'm not trying to play that big money game. I've never taken a single dime from any for-profit corporation or industry interest group. I never have. I'm the only one who's never received a contribution from a fossil fuel company. Even the other quote unquote progressive candidates have taken money from, for example, Washington Gas. Yeah. I'm the only candidate in the primary who's never taken money from organized police like the Virginia State Police Association. I'm the only candidate in the Democratic primary who's never taken money from big banks like Capital One. There's only me and one other candidate who have never taken money from big tobacco. So, I stand apart on the way that I'm actually running my campaign, but I also stand apart on issues. We had our first debate last night and Terry McAuliffe didn't show up, which was appalling.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it was just the other four candidates.
Interesting.
But, we only had 60 seconds to talk about these issues, which when, like me, you're a candidate who approaches things in a fundamentally different way, like an ideologically different way. It's really hard to explain that massive difference in 60 seconds. But take, for example, we had a question about housing and the other candidate said, we need to extend the grace period for repayment before the landlord can file an eviction. We need to, put more money in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And then it gets to me and I say, we need rent control. We need good cause eviction laws. We need cooperative ownership of multifamily buildings. We need a vacancy tax for industrial land or for commercial landlords that have a lot of off-market properties, and so on and so forth. And there's a real qualitative difference to the kinds of solutions that we're proposing. It's because they are proposing solutions that work within the existing framework, and I'm talking about the failures of the existing framework.
And it just seems like this is a moment, you talk about this in your opening video. These issues are connecting with voters that may not have even been open to them or understood that they're rooted in socialism or old progressive era policies that folks are trying to bring back. People are connecting the dots now. And that's what I'm really curious about, how folks that may be outside of your typical base, outside the progressive wing of the Democratic Party or independents, or others even. I mean, maybe they're even Republicans who align with some of these issues in Virginia. But I'm curious if you're noticing people that are outside of that ecosystem starting to understand, because of this economic crisis, because of COVID, the importance of having, Medicare for all or rent controls.
Yeah. 2 years ago, we forced the Republicans to expand Medicaid back when the Republicans still had a very narrow majority in the House of Delegates. And that was a huge victory, right? We went from 800,000 uninsured Virginians to 400,000. But because of the COVID-19 crisis, people losing their jobs, losing their health insurance, we're back up to 700,000 again.
Ooh.
We're almost in the same boat that we were in when we expanded Medicaid. And so a lot of people are realizing, holy crap, these tweaks to the existing system, trying to come into better compliance with the Affordable Care Act, it's not going to solve the problem. And they're starting to open up more to ideas like a state-run single payer plan to guarantee not access, not affordability, but healthcare. Right? The ability to see a doctor when you need it and to not have to worry about a bill at the end.
Right.
And when we're talking about, even just more basic sort of fundamental questions about the economy, one of the things that I've noticed a lot of leftists, a lot of socialists fall into, one of the traps they fall into is using really academic language to talk about it. The bourgeoisie versus the proletariat and all that.
It's my pet peeve, Lee. I love that you're saying that. We try to do that on the show, eliminate it. It's
right.
Because it's when you're an organizer, you got to speak their language.
Yeah, but you can put the same concept into terms that people are much more familiar with and much more comfortable with. And so, when I'm talking about building a socialist economy in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I don't say it like that. What I say is, a couple years ago, we gave $1.8 billion to Amazon. Would you rather keep doing that? Or would you rather I use that $1.8 billion and give some of it to you so that you can start your own employee-owned business? That way, instead of having a boss making decisions for you, it's you and your coworkers making the decisions together. And it clicks just like that. Everybody knows they're getting ripped off at work. Everybody.
So let's actually go back to that for a second, because the Amazon fight was 2018 into 19. At the same time, they were setting up the headquarters, or attempting to set up the headquarters in Queens, where I live. They set up, was it a headquarters? I can't even remember now, in Virginia. It was another headquarters in Virginia. And you were a key part of that fight. Can you talk about that? What happened in Virginia?
Yeah, when they made their announcement, they were looking for a new headquarters. I said, this whole thing is a sham, right? They were trying to play cities off of each other to try to, get a bidding war going. But I called it right from the beginning. I said, it's either going to be New York so they can be close to Wall Street investors, or it's going to be Northern Virginia so they can be closer to the Pentagon and those sweet government contracts.
Yeah.
And what do you know? They said New York and Virginia. They really were just trying to extract public money out of both of our jurisdictions. And I was one of a small handful of people that opposed it. We only had 9 minutes worth of debate on the floor about whether or not to give them $1.8 billion in cash.
Kidding me?
Cash, tax breaks, and infrastructure. We're building an entirely new campus for Virginia Tech adjacent to their headquarters, specifically for their workforce requirements. 9 minutes of debate. 9 minutes. And I had, even some very far-right Republicans after that 9-minute debate, after they voted for the incentive package, came up to me afterwards. I remember this one guy, Tim Hugo, He came up to me in the lounge off the House floor, and he said, "You know what, Lee? I listened to what you're saying, and I think you're right. I think those people are screwed." I'm like, "Why the hell did you vote yes?" But it's another issue where I stand apart from the rest of the field because former Delegate Carol Foy voted for it. Senator McClellan voted for it. And then, Terry McAuliffe bragged about the role that he played in putting the deal together. Lieutenant Governor Fairfax was part of the welcoming committee when they made the announcement. So I'm the only one running for governor on the Democratic side that opposed giving them $1.8 billion to do something they were already going to do anyway. And
have those jobs come?
They haven't come for the people that were here when we made the vote, right? So most of the positions that they've opened up so far have been filled with transfers.
Right.
So people moving in from Seattle, from Pennsylvania, from wherever, who already worked for Amazon, and they're just sort of crowding into the same housing stock that was already too expensive in Northern Virginia. Where I live, I'm about an hour away from the Amazon campus, but you heard the train whistle earlier. That rail line goes basically from my building to the Amazon campus every day. And so even though we're an hour away, the rent in my building went up 18% in a month after that announcement. Before a single shovel hit the ground, before a single person was hired, 18%.
That's so interesting because I remember, I live in Queens, and so that's where the deal was supposed to take place. And I remember saying at the time, it's not just a deal with Amazon and these supposed workers that are not going to be from the neighborhood. They're not going to be from New York, even though New York definitely has a skilled workforce for it. But simultaneously, we noticed that there was a rezoning around a councilman there who claims to be progressive. He was part of a rezoning effort there that went against the community board's interest. There's a way that we do this in New York. And as a result, all these high rises popped up. And sure enough, the neighborhood changed. It wasn't just about Amazon headquarters. It was these, expensive high rises that were being bought up and rented up by the workforce that was planning on coming to New York. And it was just as much a developer's deal as it was a bigger Amazon deal, which of course the money did not go to things like the subway and schools and all the things that are being underfunded through austerity in our city. Lee, we could talk for forever. I have so many more questions, so hopefully you can come on again soon. But if folks want to help you out in your campaign, if they want to contribute, if they want to, what are your most urgent needs right now?
We need people to give, and we need volunteers. If you can go to carterforvirginia.com, that's all one word. It's all spelled out. That website is available in 4 different languages: English, Spanish, Korean, and Vietnamese. You can see we have it up on the screen right now. There's a giant donate button in the top right, and there's a volunteer button a little bit to the left of that. 3 out of my 4 competitors in this primary have each cashed, individual checks for more than $100,000. Oh my biggest contribution so far has been $4,000. My average contribution is $41. We're doing this the hard way, but the hard way is the right way. And so I need all of your help. Every little bit counts. We have trimmed all of the fat out of a political campaign that you possibly can. We don't have any of these high paid consultants. We're not wasting money on 30, 40, 50 pieces of mail. We're not going to try to do more TV than Terry McAuliffe. It's all extremely targeted. We know who we're talking to. We're trying to get people out to vote who have never voted in a gubernatorial primary before. They are the cheapest people to reach, but they're the hardest people to convince. So we have the message, we have the movement, we have the momentum, especially coming off of the tremendously successful debate last night. But we need as many people as possible rowing in the same direction. So go to carterforvirginia.com, grab an oar, start rowing with me.
I love that. When's the primary?
The primary is June 8th. But
oh my gosh.
We have 45 days of early voting and vote by mail. So
that starts when?
Is starting very, very soon. I don't remember the exact first date.
45 days. All right. So
very, very soon.
Folks, volunteer because, phone calls. I don't know what your field program is, but if you live in Virginia, around Virginia, in the Beltway, if you're willing to go to Virginia, go knock on some doors for Lee. That's important. That's a really key part of this is early voting.
Well, because of COVID, we're not directly sending volunteers out for face-to-face interactions, but phone banks, text banking in particular is a way to have a tremendous impact. We have a wonderful text banking system where you can talk to thousands of people in an hour. So by all means, please go to carterforvirginia.com, click that volunteer button and that donate button. We need all the help we can get. But if we can get across the finish line in June 8th, we'll be the odds-on favorite for November, and we can really transform this Commonwealth into a place where wealth is common, where everyone can live and work and not have to worry about how they're going to put food on the table, how they're going to make the rent, whether or not they can afford a doctor or put their kids through college, or whether or not they're going to be discriminated against based on who they are, who they love, or who they were born to be. The stakes in this election are huge, not just for Virginia, not just for the 8.5 million people that live here, but it will set tremendous precedent for the other 49 states as well. We can transform this country and we can make Virginia the first domino to fall.
I love it. And not to mention, you are a former vet. Let's add that to the mix too.
Yes.
I'm sorry I missed out on that. You're the only one, you're a veteran. You're the only one in the race that's a veteran as well. That's huge for Virginia.
At least on the Democratic side. Yeah. So Virginia is per capita the most military and veteran heavy state in the union.
Right.
And so, this is actually part of my argument for single payer healthcare here. A lot of people think, oh, Virginia is this conservative state, you're never going to get that. But it's like, no, we have the most military and veterans of any state in America. So we have the most people who have already been on a single payer government run healthcare plan and know that it's better. Right? You can call it Medicare for all. You can call it Medicaid for all. You can call it TRICARE for all if you're trying to reach a military audience. Right. I don't care. As long as we achieve universal coverage so that everyone can see a doctor and the bill is handled on the back end and you don't have to worry about anything.
Absolutely. Lee Carter, thank you for joining us. Delegate Lee Carter, go check out his campaign, go volunteer, give money if you can. If you have $1 million and you want to throw him $200,000 or $500,000, he can take it. As long as you're a good person.
I would feel a little bit weird about a check that size, but
who knows what rich socialists are watching our show.
If there's any class traders out there that just have it like that, I don't know. We'll take those on a case-by-case basis, I guess.
Deep interviews. Just kidding. Hey, if Ben and Jerry's wanted, I'm just throwing this out there. If Ben and Jerry's wanted to give you $500,000, would you take that corporate money?
No for-profit corporations whatsoever.
Great answer. Look at that.
If Ben and or Jerry wanted to give me money, sure. But Ben and Jerry's, absolutely not.
There you go. You'd be in the pocket of dairy or something. I don't know. of socialist ice cream. Lee, thank you for joining us. Definitely appreciate it. Hope you can come on after you win the primary, and we'll be celebrating.
Thank you so much for having me on. I do appreciate it.
Only because he's part of our book club am I going to force Professor Harvey Kaye to listen to my book club pitch, because I forgot to do it. And it was very relevant to our opening. I just finished up a conversation with Mackenzie Wark on Capital is Dead, Is This Something Worse? Which talks about how data and information are new form, I shouldn't say new form of capital, it's something different. And it was such a revealing conversation with Mackenzie Wark. The book is so easy to read. It's a great starter book. And it's after our opening talking about Amazon and the tech sector, I urge all of you to check out the book and join our book club at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. Professor Harvey Kaye in the house. It's Thursday. Oh man. Okay. So Professor Harvey Kaye, if you don't know him already, if you don't have his bio memorized, he is Professor Emeritus at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and he's an AFT union member. He is the author of TNS Book Club entry number 1, Thomas Paine and the Promise of America, also The Fight for Four Freedoms, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, and FDR on Democracy, and how many more? 21 total? 22? What was the total count of books?
Now you're over the top.
I don't know. I'm just making up numbers.
Let's go. Yeah. Let's say 18 and another time will be precise.
21.
I'm also a proud owner.
I don't even have mine out today. Round 2. Okay. Big day because, there's a lot of conversation right now coming from the Biden administration about how their FDR sit down, no pun intended. Stand down, FDR. We are better than you. Our legacy in 66 days is already better than your entire legacy of 3 terms. What on earth are they thinking?
Well, the worst thing is it would be bad enough if only the Biden folks celebrated themselves. But it's that writers in places like the New York Times, both columnists and journalists alike, it seems, and in other places, though not universally, but in all too many places, they're talking as if Biden is not simply the resurrection of FDR, or in the domestic sense, the resurrection of LBJ, but we can leave that for a moment, but that somehow he's gone further than FDR had gone. I mean, it's, in one sense, the historian in me says, these people have no sense of history. Do they really know so little? But they actually word their pieces. I mean, this included not simply the like, say, of, I guess it was David Brooks, so we can expect such foolishness from, but the long time, though now former, but the long time labor journalist for the New York Times, Stephen Greenhouse, the other day in talking about presidents and labor, rightly quoted a friend of mine, Joe McCartan at Georgetown University, about FDR being the friendliest of presidents to labor, but then went on to say, and I want to get the words right, went on to say, still at times, FDR's administration deeply disappointed labor, but gives no example whatsoever. And then on the very next page says, I got to quote it, Roosevelt often pursued the interests of big business. Despite the fact he greatly expanded workers' rights, blah, blah, blah. The point is that even when they want to say something reasonable, they somehow have to do it. They have to smack FDR, and it's over and over again. It really is the case. And I actually have a whole pile of stuff.
Wait, but isn't that a strategy? Aren't they like, okay, well, if we're all going to use FDR as our reference point, then aren't they are trying to make him seem obviously more, I guess neoliberal or however you want to justify it for that era, more pro-business, so that when Biden is pro-business, he's like, oh, FDR was too.
Yeah, well, and I won't leave this question of labor, but I've got to point out today in the New York Times, a longtime writer and book writer and even columnist for the New York Times, Thomas Edsall, who I recall back in I think it was in the 90s, maybe even deeper, was a really progressive writer, really challenging the sort of corporate Washington, D.C. status quo. And he does write some good pieces. But today, and I got in a few arguments with people today as an example of just how eager everyone is to jump on the Biden Democratic Party bandwagon, to the point where they're even willing to literally use words that don't apply. He wrote in a piece called "Biden Wants No Part of the Culture War the GOP Loves." And first he says, according to a rundown by the Center for American Progress of the COVID bill's exceptionally generous provisions. I mean, they're setting it up. You can imagine McConnell. Let's suppose I'm a Republican. I've just read the seemingly progressive Thomas Edsall. And I say, and I remember this. So next week when I come after Biden, I say, don't you think the COVID relief bill was generous enough? I mean, it's as if they're so eager to celebrate the Biden bill, which, by the way, is wonderful in many respects, that they go overboard in a fashion that will turn the COVID bill, and I'll come back to it in just a second, into almost like this great charity measure on the part of the Biden administration for working people, okay? Because now we come to the next thing, and this is the thing that bugs me no end. It bugged me about the Obamacare question. It bugged me when Obama was running for president, and we all know what his presidency entailed. But crucially, the benefits are universal. Well, the benefits are not universal in the COVID relief bill. They are specifically means tested. Right. Okay. Now, people might say, well, it's almost universal. It's like 85%. The point is, it is either universal or it's not universal. Okay. Now, to come back to the labor stuff, it's the case that this is really important. I asked the other day on Twitter, I know I sent this to you. So let's see now. You think Biden will do to Amazon? Okay, will do to Amazon. Let's suppose the workers vote for the union. Okay, let's assume that. It doesn't mean that Amazon will necessarily negotiate in good faith.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that's important.
The next step. Yeah.
I mean, they have all these companies, well, not Amazon, they never recognize the union, but they may say, yeah, we recognize the union. And then they spend a year or more to the point where workers themselves become, like
exhausted.
This union got us nothing, okay?
Right, right.
Where are we? So back in 1944, during the war, Montgomery Ward was headed, there was a chain store, big company, and also a manufacturer of many an item, headed by a man named Sewell Avery. And I will note that in 1934, 10 years earlier, Sewell Avery joined with the other half a dozen wealthiest men in America to launch something called, and I think this came up also when you had Tom Frank on, the American Liberty League, which I wrote about in my Four Freedoms book. The American Liberty League went out of its way to try to bring down the Roosevelt administration, either at the elections of 34 or as they projected at the election of 30. They failed, and they spent millions trying to do it. But these people hated FDR. And as he later said, I welcome their hatred. Well, now it's 10 years later. It's 1944. Sewell Avery, over and over again, refused to recognize his workers' desire for a union. And according to the wartime regulations, that was utterly unacceptable. Okay, on top of the fact the National Labor Relations Board had already said you must do it. So FDR, maybe in part revenge, but for whatever reason, he literally ordered American troops into the Montgomery Ward headquarters.
Whoa.
And they arrested.
Oh my goodness.
Avery. And there's a famous photo on the cover of the newspapers of the day of two GIs carrying Avery out, still sitting in the chair because he refused to stand up. Now, the story, if you leave it there, seems like a major victory for FDR because, my God, he showed.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Now, what happened was apparently when he was taken to prison, he went to jail. The fact was that apparently he had some deal with the jailers. The jailers were letting him call in his orders to the company, in spite of the fact he was no longer supposed to be the head of the company, that the U.S. had taken it over. So this was becoming something of an embarrassment to FDR because everyone should realize newspaper publishers did not like FDR. Okay. They did not like him. So they were running these pieces about what an embarrassment for FDR because Sewell Avery is still heading up the company. So FDR said, okay, wait a second. I'm gonna order that the workers vote now. You want the union or do you not? And they voted yes, okay, which automatically shut up all of these publishers, okay? Now the question is, let's suppose they vote for the union. And Amazon screws around, right? Well, Biden's already said, it's not legal it's not legal to do certain kinds of things. And I'm trying to imagine Biden, in order to live up to, this is not going to happen, trying to live up to FDR by, nationalizing what they call federalizing the National Guard in Alabama and sending them into the Amazon warehouse. Or maybe, I don't know if he's still officially the executive in charge of any fashion business.
Oh, I wonder if that's why he stepped down. He was like, he might arrest me.
Right? Wouldn't that be a great?
Sure, that's it.
Or how about this? And the troops carry him into the Senate Budget Committee hearing so Bernie can interrogate him properly.
Oh, we can fantasize, Harvey, but the reality is you got to let the process play out. Like it's his favorite phrase, process. My God.
Yeah, right. That was a great clip you played of Bernie. I just love the guy. God, I love that guy.
It's like when someone doesn't show up to a debate, you have two candidates and one of the candidates doesn't show up and you still ask them the questions.
Right. Yeah.
So why is it clearly this is a messaging strategy. Someone has issued these talking points or done phone calls with reporters to say, we've actually been more progressive. We've done more than FDR did in his entire 3 terms. I mean, it's so preposterous. It's so ridiculous on the surface. And I don't understand how this is continuing to be like, it's just,
It's over and over again. Yes, it's over and over again.
I mean, my only thought is it's step one in setting up a situation in which they can say, well, no, even your like we said, even your hero FDR aligned with business on these occasions. But I mean, okay, so there's the labor standard, the PRO Act, for instance. It's a fantastic piece of legislation.
Absolutely. Needs
to happen. Biden is supporting it. That is something that they can hold true and say, yes, if this is passed, if Biden, puts on his Johnson hat, his LBJ hat, and pushes Manchin and Sinema and any other bad actors in the Democratic Party, the Senate, to step up, then okay, then they can claim the victory. But what are they claiming is the victory right now? What are they claiming that they've achieved?
Right. Well, that's an interesting point because of this. I mean, if we look, I'm going to play the historian now for a moment. If we look at the FDR years, the FDR presidency from 1933 until his passing in 1945, elected to the presidency 4 times. Okay, 4 times. That if his initial actions, the first 100 days, became renowned. And they became renowned because immediately FDR stepped in to literally close the banks to make sure they could reopen. And by the way, people had such confidence in FDR that when the banks reopened some days later, more money went back into the banks than had. So, but okay, the other thing is that he signed into law the National Industrial Recovery Act, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, this major series of acts. They created the Civilian Conservation Corps. They signed into law the creation of the PWA, the Public Works Administration, which would take about 2 years to get going, really, because it was huge projects, and they did not want to be involved in any kind of corrupt practices. Well, the key thing is this. Everyone remembers the not everyone, but people who bother to pay attention usually remember the National Labor Relations Act. And the reason they do is even now, Biden's first move on that first day after his inaugural address was delivered was to throw out Peter Robbs, I'm forgetting the name, something like that, who was this lawyer who was definitely lined up with Trump, as he was with Reagan years ago, very anti-labor. And the idea they threw him out as a sign that they were going to commit to the labor movement. Well, what FDR did when he signed into law the National Industrial Recovery Act, he didn't just literally talk about it, he signs into law something that included the right of workers to organize. That's in 1933. Everyone forgets this. It's as if later he gets around to it. No, right away in the first 100 days. And that included, moreover, the first attempt on the part of federal law to create a minimum wage, okay, which was really crucial. And when he signed it, FDR, giving some signal as to where he was going, said no company should be allowed to operate in the United States that does not pay a living wage. Now, what happened was the corporations found their way around the law on this occasion. But I do want you to know that 2 million plus workers sort of marched.
You can't say that anymore.
Yeah, right. They marched into the labor movement. Almost overnight, the labor movement grew with 2 million. And then in 1934, there were general strikes around the United States, empowered by workers' desire to be organized and to be recognized. Okay. Then in 1935, FDR is encouraged enough by labor's push and also by his friend, Senator Robert Wagner of New York State, to sign into law the National Labor Relations Act. And that wasn't simply workers have the right to organize. They created the board to make sure the government would stand behind workers' efforts to do so. Now, the Biden statement back 2 weeks ago or so, his little video for Twitter or something like that, where he said basically workers have the right to organize, you can't mess with them and so on, was a really important step. And I think that the question is to what extent he follows up. And of course, the biggest question is, are they going to do what needs to be done to pass not only the resecuring of voting rights, but the PRO Act, right? The Protection of the Right to Organize Act. And they wouldn't need to say that Biden's gone beyond FDR. What is this? This is like mine is bigger than yours kind of thing. That's crazy. All they need to say is Biden has stood in the tradition of FDR. That's all they got to do. Why belittle the greatest president of the 20th century to score points, right?
Well, I mean, it sounds very classic Cap strategy, strangely enough, is pitting one against another. It's a very strange messaging technique. So other than the PRO Act, which if it is signed and other than that, I mean, is there anything else he can stand on, truthfully, that could be compared to the legacy of FDR? Maybe even the first 100 days. Forget it. Maybe that's what they're trying to do, is say in the first 100 days, we've done more. The $1.9 trillion package, which is means tested, as we said, it's not universal. He had to do that. Any president who would have to do that. I would even argue a Republican would have to do that, given the conditions, the material conditions in our country right now and what's about to happen. We haven't even gotten to rent, to dealing with back rents and student loan debt, of course. I mean, there's so many issues that are compounded right now that we haven't even brought to the table. And I will, a couple of things, as you say, that cross my mind. The first one is, this is an act that whose benefits are temporary. They're only through this year, as I understand, right? That's exactly. First of all, okay? And a relief bill is usually just that. It doesn't make it permanent. Though the tax credits in the bill for parents would be significant if they could make that a permanent thing. But I sent my observations and this Tom Edsel's piece around, saying to people, what do you think? And a young friend of mine, 24, actually, I don't mind saying, he won't mind, I say, Cale Brooks over at Jacobin, the producer over there, said to me, what happened to the student debt, question? Okay. My first thought was, well, I mean, they can celebrate this all they want, but they didn't even mobilize enough to push the $15 minimum wage through. I mean, I want to make it clear. This is a great bill. This is a good act to have instituted, but we have yet to know what they're going to do next. Okay. I mean, we haven't had a news conference yet, correct? I believe it's I think it starts today, tomorrow. I don't know what it is. Because the big question that I have in mind. Great question. I had to debate it, but I don't remember what it was.
Okay. Well, the big question for me, because I think this is going to be the moment where we're going to see how much in the direction of FDR they really want to go, is they have promised every week that as soon as the COVID bill was passed, and now they're on their, I guess they're still on tour, right? Their victory tour. They owe the American people an address to Congress. That is Biden-Harris owe that, right. Because right now we don't know where we're going. So far we have this bill. We know it's going to be effective for a certain number of months. We never got the 2,000. We definitely don't have 2,000 a month. Students with huge debts, former students with huge debts, are waiting to hear what's going to happen to them. I mean, over and over, all of these things are coming up. The immigration question is going to definitely come back big time onto the agenda. But for me, seriously, I mean, all of this stuff will lead me to ask, you're celebrating this man as FDR. What are you going to do? What are you going to tell the American people when you go before Congress? Okay, what are you going to tell us? And to what extent, and this is important, and this is really imperative, because FDR, and as Bernie knew, is if you're going to make things happen, you don't simply do it from the top down. FDR was very clear about something. When he signed all this stuff into law, he would say, new laws in themselves do not bring the millennium. Then, okay, you're going to have to organize. And he actually sent his cabinet officers out from the Secretary of Agriculture out, over to labor, and tell people, you have got to organize if we're going to make these things happen, because capitalists were not eager to accept these laws. Mm-hmm. Okay. They even had their own lawyers say the laws are not in effect until the Supreme Court says they're in effect. So, but FDR knew
that's basically a threat to
absolutely
pending litigation over and over and over and over again.
So I'd like to hear. Yeah, I'd like to hear. Yeah, right. So I'm sorry, I'm talking over you. I apologize.
No, you're good.
Because I'd like to hear. I will tell you what I'd like to hear in Biden's speech. All the things I've just referred to. I want him to lay out the agenda and the priorities, and when he mentions the PRO Act. And he then mentions, and we're going to do everything in our power to, he's already said he's willing to see the reform of the filibuster, which goes against the grain of everything he said before. But the question is, are they going to push it? Are they going to make it happen? Because voting rights, workers' rights, and everything else that matters of a progressive sort to help put him in the FDR tradition hangs on that. And then I want to hear him say, and if everyone tells me that I'm exaggerating, whether FDR ever said it or not, Labor said he said it. FDR was supposed to have said, if I went to work in a factory, this time could be I went to a factory or a warehouse, I'd join a union. That's what I want him to say. Okay.
Well, he's Scranton Joe. I mean, is it unusual for a president who's just elected with an pandemic economic situation like this? Is it unusual for them not to present their case to America on day one? I mean, he's spoken to the country, but he hasn't laid out his case to America. Right. Is that unusual? It seems
well, yes, essentially it is. We're used to the fact that when a president's reelected, he will give the State of the Union address. We're used to the fact every year it's called the State of the Union address. Mm-hmm. There is no obligation when you first take in office to do that. However, in the face of a crisis such as this, it would be unimaginable that Biden would not go before Congress and the nation in the age of television and the web and all of that. And the world will watch. I mean, that's how significant it will be, because seriously speaking, the world is waiting to hear what this president wants to do in the face of fascists abroad, fascists at home, conservatives in the Congress, and fascists in the Congress too.
Fascists in the Congress, yeah.
Okay. And by the way, let's not forget that people are mobilized in a fashion. I mean, Black Lives Matter, the labor movement, folks are ready and willing to make noise. And I think there is this holding of breath right now to see what kind of noise we make.
That's right. So let's pivot to LBJ, because I love to compare him to LBJ, or want him to be like. I don't. It's not that I compare him to, but he is a creature of the Senate, and he should have some skills that LBJ had. Like, I don't know, twisting Joe Manchin's arm, which he's done a little bit of, or politely non-touching twisting Kirsten Sinema's arms. He's more likely to massage her shoulders, but whatever. No, I mean, but the reality is that it's peculiar to me that he is waiting for everyone to come to him or the process to be played out. It just seems it's like a stalling tactic. He's actually speaking right now. If you're seeing me pause for a second, do we want to, Dorsey? Can we play that? Can we play him speaking? Me? It's like we're on CNN.
We needed a whole of government approach. So I directed Jeff Zients, the coordinator of our COVID-19 response, to put us on a war footing, and I meant that in a literal sense, to get us on track to truly beat this virus. And I'm proud to announce that tomorrow, 58 days into our administration, we will have met my goal of administering 100 million shots to our fellow Americans. That's weeks ahead of schedule. And even with the setbacks we faced during the winter storms. And there's another big step on the path to checking putting checks in pockets and shots in people's arms. When we crossed the 50 million doses just 3 weeks ago, I told you that every time we hit the 50 million mark, I'd update you on our progress. So here's where we are today. 8 weeks ago, only 8% of seniors, those most vulnerable to COVID-19, had received a vaccination. Today, 65% of people aged 65 or older have received at least one shot, and 36% are fully vaccinated. And that's key, because this is the population that represents 80% of the well over 500,000 COVID-19 deaths that have occurred in America. We have nearly double the amount of vaccine doses that we distribute to states, tribes, and territories each week. We have gone from 1 million shots a day that I promised in December before we were even sworn in to an average of 2.5 million shots a day, outpacing the rest of the world significantly. And here's how we accomplished this. Using the power given to a president under the Defense Production Act,
there you go.
We expedited critical materials in vaccine production, such as equipment, machinery, and supplies. We work with vaccine manufacturers to speed up the delivery of millions more doses and brokered a historic manufacturing partnership between competing companies who put patriotism and public health first, including.
So let's meet this for a second.
Military,
Yeah.
Because we just got a little bit of an update that he basically just spends the next this is not fully live. He basically spends the next 4 minutes or a few minutes talking about how they distributed the vaccine.
Okay. I just had an idea, though. It occurred to me when he mentioned the Defense Production Act.
Yeah.
If maybe there's some clause in there which would allow him to send troops into Amazon. And
Hashtag arrest Bezos.
Right.
That's what we got to do.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take us away. It's just before I forgot.
No, I took us away. All right. So how can he channel LBJ more? What would LBJ do in this moment?
Okay, so LBJ took office November 22nd, 1963, in the wake of John Kennedy's assassination. And he went before Congress. And by the way, an assassination is a pretty critical moment in history. People were just dumbfounded in a certain way. What happens next kind of thing. Right. And it was the middle of the Cold War, and people weren't quite sure. And we shouldn't forget that it was only a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there's all of this. But LBJ went before Congress, and he laid out an agenda, what they were going to do.
How soon after? This is the next day?
I think it was 5 days later, something like that. Yeah. And by the way, everyone remembers the agenda because it began with the civil rights question. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I may surprise people, but LBJ always said that he knew he was more liberal than Kennedy. And if you knew anything about LBJ, you would believe that. And if you knew anything about Kennedy, you would believe it too. Okay. But the interesting thing that we forget, and this is not to take us away from Biden, but so the second item on the agenda was to fulfill Kennedy's promise of cutting taxes on business, I believe it was. And this was a terrible precedent at that time. Republicans for many years afterward would refer to Kennedy's idea of cutting taxes to validate their own efforts to do so. But the point was that LBJ did offer, in spite of his, I believe that a younger Biden could give a good speech, even though some of it might have been plagiarized. Okay. I don't know if everyone knows my reference there, but the fact is that
the Neil Kinnock speech from his presidential campaign in 88?
Yeah. The 88 election season was that? Yeah. But the thing is, LBJ
get out of that race because of it. Yeah.
LBJ was not known for as a dynamic speaker. His Texas drawl really sort of slowed things down. But actually, he gave remarkable speeches because he could speak somehow to Americans so that they fully understood. He was very clear about where he was going. Let's not forget it. Somebody's bound to just tweet me and say, "What the hell's wrong with you?" LBJ took us into Vietnam far, far more deeply than Kennedy had taken us into Vietnam, and we know the number of deaths. American deaths were 75,000, and the total deaths might have been up to 1 million in Vietnam as a consequence. But the point was that LBJ was a decided progressive on domestic affairs, except for one thing. And this is why I hope Biden does not become LBJ on this one issue. LBJ told George Meany, the head of the AFL-CIO, and Walter Reuther, who was the head of the industrial section and the UAW, that he had an agenda. He laid out the agenda. It had to do with civil rights, fighting poverty, et cetera, Medicare, Medicaid, and somehow or other, labor's desire to reform the labor law the Taft-Hartley law of 1947. The idea was to liberate labor to be able to go into the South and organize. In other words, to block the right to so-called right to work laws from stymieing them. Okay. And the problem was that LBJ promised them that they would do that as like number 5 on the list. And what happened was it was winter of 65, 66. We're already going deeply into Vietnam. The point was that LBJ's political capital was running out. And it was, I believe, it was one of, or the only filibuster that LBJ failed to break. And as a consequence, no labor law reform occurred. So if Biden does not secure the PRO Act with labor having his back and the Democrats bowing to that ambition, then one could talk about Biden being LBJ in a way we don't want him to be LBJ.
It's interesting. So if LBJ had worked to organize the South, while he opened the door to doing it, if it opened the door to doing it while he signed the Civil Rights Act, he wouldn't have lost the South for generations, potentially.
Yeah, he himself didn't. Yeah, well, the main thing.
Does that make sense?
The better way to look at it would be this. Let's go even bigger. The fact is there would have been a hell of a lot more struggles going on in the South alongside of civil rights. And since most African Americans were workers, it would have literally been a combined civil rights, labor rights kind of thing. American history would have changed radically.
That is amazing. So speaking of that, Luke King asks a question, says, speaking of LBJ, the Democratic Party hasn't won a majority of white voters in a presidential election since LBJ signed the Voting Rights Act. Care to speculate why? Well, racism? I wonder why. Gerrymandering, racism. I mean, it's not related, but I hesitate to just say racism because class was so fundamental to those things at the time. But race kept us from having national health care in the late 40s in many ways. Okay. That also has to do with the South because look, if Truman had followed through, well, he did. Truman wanted national health care. He picked it up from FDR's desire to have Social Security included and the Economic Bill of Rights speech of 44. And I won't keep us long. I know you've got Arun and Rep Rabb coming. So, but the thing is that when Truman lost the Congress in 46, which is a whole labor question in itself we could have gotten into, the Republicans were clearly going to block all of the reforms that FDR wanted to pursue and Truman had promised to pick up on. And capital mobilized against national health care. And so too did the Southern Democrats who came to be known as Dixiecrats. Because the Northern capitalists did not want to empower workers, okay? And they were prepared to offer benefits to healthcare benefits to workers in order to avoid national health care. Interesting.
And then the Southern Democrats, this will be my last point, they did not want national health care, in spite of the fact that white workers might well have wanted national health care. But the powerful in the South did not want it because they did not want to integrate the hospitals.
Oh, yes. This is a big, right.
Yep. Now, there's the racial thing just used to literally destroy. American history would be so different today. That's all I can say.
Wow. Those two things that happened. Yeah. Professor Harvey Kaye, love having you on. Never enough time.
Love joining you.
Hopefully we can do another special soon. Maybe there'll be some breaking news and we can jump on and just go for an hour.
Happily. Happily. Just ask. I'm here. Just have Ruthie give me a call. I'm all ready.
Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. All right. PACs. You know, I love to talk about money and politics. I love to talk about PACs. I'm fascinated by this because there is a new PAC out whose goal is to defeat all PACs, possibly. I think that's the right way of saying it. Shana Gallagher is the executive director of the UnPAC, and Joseline Garcia is the organizing director of the UnPAC. Hello, ladies. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Thanks for having us.
I'm loving the energy already. All right. So, yeah, just chime in. If you talk over each other, it's fine. It's more fun. So who wants to take the lead and say where'd the idea come from?
Go for it, Shana.
If you insist. So the idea came from an amalgamation of things, including my own student organizing history. I was an organizer all 4 years that I was in school doing fossil fuel divestment organizing with a lot of the founders of Sunrise. That was the thing back then. And I learned the hard way that we're not going to pass meaningful climate policy until we pass meaningful democracy reform, because the fossil fuel lobby has blocked that sort of policy for our entire lifetime. And I actually never thought I would work in campaigns because our campaign finance system is so broken. But I got recruited to the Better for Texas campaign and then worked on the Bernie campaign with Joseline and have run really big student organizing programs since then. And so I really believe in empowering young people to be a part of our political process. But I also believe that we actually need to address the root problem of all of the issues that young people care about if we're going to be able to take action on any of them. Those problems being climate change, access to an affordable education, universal health care, gun violence, you name it. And so for me, it's been a long time coming. And then Joseline and I had the great fortune of working together on the Bernie campaign. I was the national student organizing director. She was the California and New York student organizing director. And we came back together after the campaign and said, how can we continue the work we started? How can we continue empowering young people to be a part of our political process? Because not enough people are doing organizing, let alone youth organizing. And we decided that the best way to make the bold visionary policies that we fought for on the campaign a political reality, because right now they're not, unfortunately, is to take action right now at this historic opportunity to pass the For the People Act and ensure that young people are a part of the unprecedented advocacy it's going to take. Nothing worth happening happens without students and young people involved. So that's why we decided to jump in. And yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Josh, if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, thank you, Shana. So my story is a little bit different, where I didn't really think about democracy reform until in the recent years. I didn't realize it was a thing. And I think a lot of young people and the public in general is in a similar position where we know that things aren't working, right? But we don't, like, a tangible and realistic solution is hardly ever brought to our attention. And that's also not by accident. And so I got involved in organizing as well as a student. I was in high school and I got involved because I was just witnessing a lot of really awful things happen to people that I care about in my communities. And it didn't make sense to me as to why are these things surrounding the criminal justice system, surrounding immigration, surrounding our education, are impacting these really good people in this way. And so I got involved in organizing because my peers told me that I, as a young Latina, actually have the power and the means to create this change. So I can see these experiences stop, right? And so they trained me, they gave me the tools, and I started getting involved in college. And similar to Shana, I did not think I was going to work for a candidate either. I did a lot of issue organizing, but I got involved with Senator Seder because he was a candidate who, believed in the power of students and young people and actually invested in a program which had never been seen before. And when I was a student, I was involved in the United States Student Association, which is the oldest student organization in the country. And soon after, I became the president of the organization, where I worked much closely with the senator. And so over these past 10 years that I've started organizing, and I'm 26, so it hasn't been, that long of my lifetime, I've lobbied.
A good decade to organize if you're going to do it. If this was the decade.
But what I'm trying to say is that, like, I've introduced policy, I've lobbied, I've fundraised, I have marched, I've gotten arrested at the Hill. I've worked on electoral campaigns, and sometimes we win, but many times we lose. And the scary part of the times where we lose these campaigns is that people are still going to continue hurting. They're going to continue to be in pain. And that's young people, but also their loved ones. And so we're in a position where losing and failure is just really not an option. And the connecting issue is having to reform our democracy. And for the first time in a very long time, we're in a position where we can get this bill actually passed. And, the Democrats are in control.
So tell us about the bill. What is this bill, and where does it stand right now?
So glad you asked. So I usually describe it as a list of things that any country that calls itself a democracy should already have, but of course America doesn't. And broadly, it would get big money out of politics and make it easier for people to vote. And the ways that it would make it easier for people to vote is by mandating same day and automatic voter registration in all 50 states, reenfranchisement of all felons in all 50 states. Anyone can vote by mail whenever they want to in all 50 states. And increasing polling locations on college campuses and in communities of color and on indigenous reservations, making it easier to vote, expanding the electorate. The bulk of it would get big money out of politics. And the main ways that it would do that, reduce the role, I should say, the main ways it would do that would be to overturn Citizens United, ban gerrymandering in all 50 states, introduce public financing of elections so that you don't need to be a millionaire or know a bunch of millionaires to run for office and win, and just really break the stranglehold that corporations and the ultra wealthy have over our Congress, because right now the system is broken such that both parties operate within a system of legalized corruption, and they are incentivized to spend their time fundraising and not to spend their time doing things that are beneficial for their constituents. There's a study that I can share with your viewers. It's a Harvard Business School study that actually shows there's zero correlation between a member of Congress doing things that are good for their constituents and winning re-election. Zero correlation. The only thing that matters is how much money they raise. And we know that members of Congress spend up to 80% of their time dialing for dollars and fundraising. And that is why the system's broken. They're not out there listening to their constituents, especially not listening to our generation and our needs. So we're not represented in our government. This bill, we think, is the closest thing to a silver bullet that we've seen in our lifetime that would make our democracy actually functional and accountable. And so we're really committed to seeing it through. Can the Democrats deliver it? We're not sure, but we're going to try to make sure that we hold them accountable and that they actually pass something that would reduce their own power as well as that of the Republican Party to entrench themselves.
So who's, Joseline, who's the author of the bill? Who's sponsoring it? Where does it go?
Yeah. So it was actually introduced a couple years back in 2019. That was the version of it. And almost the similar version of it has been reintroduced this time. And it's by Representative John Sarbanes, who's a good friend of ours as well that we've been working closely with. And in the House, actually, it passed earlier this month and it got all co-sponsorships from the Democrats. And then here over on the Senate side, it was actually introduced on Wednesday. And so the Democrats at the moment are rallying up, trying to get as many co-sponsors as possible.
Who introduced it on the Senate side?
Merkley.
Yeah, there we go.
Who is it?
Senator Merkley, Oregon.
Senator Merkley. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, but then the reality here, right? Like, because these bills have been presented before and there've been like major conversations about campaign finance reform in the Democratic Party. But, you know, I love hearing Democrats say, well, we changed our business model, meaning the leadership of the Democratic Party. We changed our business model to rely heavily on lobbyists because we had to keep up with the Republicans and all the money. And then when they're presented with an opportunity to not be beholden to that money, for both parties to not be beholden, they're like, whoa, wait, hang on a second. And they reveal themselves, not all of them, I'm saying, but just a crew of Democrats who reveal themselves. So what is those who are not supporting this bill or who have yet to sign on? What is the pushback?
What is the pushback from the Democrats who haven't signed on?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we have 60 organizers who we employ. We are hoping to get up to 100, but we have 60 students and young people across the country who are mobilizing their communities and their schools around this legislation. And we meet with them every week. And we had a member of Congress, a former member of Congress, come join us at our weekly call last week. And he was telling stories about how basically every waking hour he spent while he was on the Hill fundraising, and that when he got into office, he was told, you are not a legislator, you're a fundraiser. And they had people waiting for him in the car between meetings. Yeah. He would always have a driver so that he could keep fundraising, right? And so we spoke with him, and he was sharing that this is something that members of Congress are comfortable with. This is the system, right? And they know that right now, in order to maintain their power, in order to keep their jobs, which is an instinct that we're all motivated by, that they need to keep fundraising, and that the system and the status quo right now has served them such that they attained power, they're in power, they feel like they're doing the right
committee
thing.
Positions. I mean,
exactly.
Even once they get into Washington, it's like you get good spots if you play ball with the with the Democrats,
exactly. Right. And playing ball usually means you're a good fundraiser as well. So the system is very profoundly broken. Again, it turns even good people in most cases into folks who are just obsessed with fundraising, because that is how the incentive systems are designed at this point. And so, people are scared of change. And that's, I think, where the pushback is coming from. People are not sure what the new democracy will look like when power dramatically shifts to people, right? And it's actually functioning for working people and young people and people of color, not just for corporations and the ultra wealthy. So it's going to be a big change. It could fundamentally transform the way our democracy works. And we really think that that is absolutely necessary and existential, and that's why we need to get it done. But it's definitely taking some of our more moderate friends in the Senate a little bit longer to sign on.
If I might add, one part is a co-sponsorship, but another barrier to actually getting the bill passed, at least on the Senate side, is, the filibuster concept. And so, with some Democrats, they've told us and they've told our organizers that they will co-sponsor the legislation. And what we are then following up with, okay, are you willing to do everything in your power to actually means like it will pass? And so I think it's a two-pronged concept that we're dealing with. It's, yes, do you support the bill, but are you actually going to ensure that it passes?
That's a filibuster. Yeah.
Right. That's a great point. I mean, this is, it's really easy to sign on to popular bills, to show up, and actually do the work.
Yeah. So, are you willing to show up?
Are you willing? Exactly. So in terms of the organizing structure, where are you targeting the organizing? Like which geographically, where are you targeting?
Yeah. So we have tier 1 and tier 2 states. Our tier 1 states are Arizona and West Virginia. Because
why is that?
Why could that be? As Joseline just mentioned, there is a profoundly anti-democratic relic of white supremacy called the filibuster, which remains around. And there are 2 members of the Congress who are Democratic senators who have not yet said that they are in support of reforming the filibuster. Not yet, but we are going to help them see the light, and we look forward to working with them to overcome the obstacles that are in the path of the For the People Act passing, because our future hangs in the balance. And then our tier 2 states are conservative Republican members of Congress who we deem more movable. So these are people like Pat Toomey, who is retiring and hopefully should be concerned about his legacy. Same with Rob Portman in Ohio. These are places like North Carolina and even Florida, where there are election campaigns coming up in 2022, and those folks only won by a pretty small margin, and young people really could be the margin of victory. So we are focusing in states that are strategic to either overcoming the filibuster, or there is a world in which some Republicans sign on to this, especially a Lisa Murkowski or a Susan Collins. And so those are our tier 2 states. That said, we really want to, in the same way that the Bernie campaign had, the Students for Bernie program had a presence in all 50 states. We really want to have a presence in all 50 states. We want to be reaching out to any and all young people who agree big money in politics is bad, democracy is good. And we want to be generating a nationwide, the never used word, movement of young people who understand that we're told that the divisions in this country are left versus right. We're told that things are fine and maybe Joe Biden's in office now and we should all just go back to how things were. But actually, the divisions in this country are top versus bottom. And we know that this is ultimately a matter of generational warfare. I mean, we feel like our generation is being completely ignored by our current government. We are not being represented. The compounding crises we're facing of even just climate change and the student debt crisis, to name 2 of many, are absolutely crippling. And young people are not able to live their fullest lives and be flourishing in the way that we want them to. And so we really want to make sure that our members of Congress understand that on both sides of the aisle, they risk losing an entire generation of young voters forever, potentially, if they do not deliver right now, especially Democrats, when they have the power to do so.
Why is it framed through the lens of just young people? I mean, this is just an organizing question. Have you reached out to labor, for instance, had those kinds of relationships built? Because there's been recent criticism of progressive groups for being separate from labor recently. Like there's been some articles about that.
I think from where Shana and I were coming from, and as she mentioned, when we were coming up with UnPAC, we were coming from a position that we are two people that started off with student organizing and also built a historical student and young person program and an electoral campaign, perhaps the largest and most effective youth and student operation like in the history of electoral politics. And so we wanted to be very intentional, not just on the issue that we were organizing with, but not having to reinvent the wheel. Like we had 2,000 trained student leaders across the country in that program who already have the skills and know how to do this work. And so we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, but rather build upon what we had started and continue the work that we started about a year ago and, unfortunately ended. And so we're now continuing it and building upon it in a different capacity. And so I would say it's not so much that there was no intention to reach out to labor. It's more so that this is what we wanted to build upon and ensure that these young people continue to have an investment and were empowered to create the change that, they saw fit.
And if I may add, part of the reason why we're focusing so specifically on young people as well is because there's already a lot of momentum around this legislation, which is great. But that momentum is not coming from young people. And again, as Joseline was mentioning, she didn't think about democracy reform for a long time. I had to learn the hard way to think about democracy reform. Most young people do not connect the dots between the issues that they care about and the need to fix our very broken democracy and the opportunity to do that right now, which is a really once in a lifetime, all hands on deck moment. And so there are lots of national coalitions and hundreds of groups that are organizing around this specific bill. But we looked across the space and we saw really none of them that were activating young people on this issue. And we, again, feel like nothing worth doing is going to happen without young people. We're the best organizers. If this is going to have the best chance of winning, we absolutely need to be there. And by we, I mean our generation. Young people absolutely need to have a seat at the table. And hopefully we can be the straw that breaks the camel's back when it comes to reforming the filibuster and getting this done.
How is the PAC structured? Is all organizing? Are you doing what are the goals specifically?
Yes.
Go ahead, Josh.
For sure. So as Shana mentioned, we have 60 organizers, and these are student organizers that are being paid $15 an hour. And when we were budgeting, we were very intentional of ensuring that was taking place. And a big portion to that is that oftentimes in these movements that rely on volunteers, we don't find working class people, let alone young people and Black and brown students participating as much as they would want to, even though the issues are directly impacting them. And that's because they don't often have the capacity to do volunteer work. And so that's one big reason why we wanted to ensure that our organizers and our students were getting paid. So we have the student organizers, and they, as Shana mentioned, they are based and organizing their peers on their college campuses and statewide on key priority states. A lot of the tactics that they are using are both an educational aspect and also pressure. So, in terms of pressure, they're pressuring their senators, right? And they are recruiting and training their peers to be able to scale up those tactics. At the moment, a lot of that has included calling their senators, emailing them, doing social media blasts. And at the moment, they're organizing to try to personally convene with their senator to ask them directly if they will co-sponsor this legislation and ensure they do everything possible to get it passed. And on the education side, as Shana mentioned, a lot of people don't connect the dots with democracy reform. And so students are doing class presentations. They're also speaking to various student organizations on their campus and across the state to really bring about that education. And again, as we mentioned, people know that things are not working, but it's very difficult to have the resources to understand what is the root problem and a feasible and realistic solution to it. So we're reaching out to their peers to ensure that they are aware of this. And we're very confident that young people will support this legislation. It's just really about ensuring that they are aware that this actually exists and empowering them with the tools and the skills to do something about it.
And how do you guys fund yourselves? Where's the money come from? the ultimate question everybody asks.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of momentum around this legislation. So we were very much in the right place at the right time. We have institutional partners who are other organizations that mobilize around democracy reform, and they have been our initial major donors. We have had some very generous individuals who've also made contributions at a non-zero sum. And then we do have a small dollar fundraising program that we are hoping to ramp up soon. It hasn't been our major focus yet, but ultimately, of course, what we want to do is empower small donors and any everyday working person, especially young people who at best can usually donate, $5 to a candidate that they believe in, to understand that those contributions do matter, and that they will matter a lot more when we pass something like the For the People Act, which really incentivizes small dollar donations through that public financing system that I mentioned. So we believe in the small donor model. We have yet to build that up in a really big way, but we are hoping that ultimately that's what we will be able to rely on.
Just remind everybody, what's the name of the bill and where it stands in the Senate, what the timeline on that is?
Yeah, so it's called the For the People Act. Also, S1 or HR1 is the version that passed the House. It was introduced earlier this week, as Joseline mentioned. The next sort of schedule for the bill is that there's a hearing happening on the bill in the Senate on March 24th, and then debate and a potential first vote is expected in mid-April.
Fantastic. All right. Anything else you guys want to share with the audience? They can learn more, help out, volunteer, whatever.
For any young person watching, we want you to know that there are all these tropes about young people being apathetic and lazy, and that's why they don't vote. It's absolutely not true. We know young people don't vote because they are systematically disenfranchised, and it doesn't need to be that way. This legislation is existential for our generation having a future to look forward to. So definitely please join us. You can sign up at un-pac.org, and we would love to organize with you. Again, we want to work with any young person who agrees big money in politics is bad, democracy is good, and wants to have a brighter future to look forward to. So we look forward to organizing with you.
Joseline, final thoughts?
Ditto.
Easy enough. All right. Shana Gallagher, Joseline Garcia, thank you for joining us. Go check out UnPAC. We had it up on the screen. We'll put it in the information section as well. Thank you, guys. Thank you, gals.
Thank you so much for having us.
Right. Bye. We will be right back with our amazing panel. But first, I want to give a shout out to Bleep Blump Ben on Twitch for the raid. He just sent over a bunch of Femme Friday raiders. Thank you very much. All right, we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. So a couple of years ago, I did some reporting in Wisconsin. There were a lot of races happening at once, and I'm excited to start talking about Wisconsin again, especially this week, because the current senator from Wisconsin has been putting his foot in his mouth and revealing how much of a racist he is. I'm thrilled to have Tom Nelson on. He is currently the county executive of, I got to correct me on this, Outagamie County.
That's right. That's right. Good for you. That's great. Love it. Love it.
And of course, running for U.S. Senate in Wisconsin, Tom Nelson. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
So there's a lot happening right now. You have a primary. You also have a current senator who's been getting a lot of attention. Not sure what his strategy is. But before we get to those two things, let's just talk about what inspired you to run and a little bit about your background.
Okay. Well, I'm a pastor's kid from Little Chute, Wisconsin, and I grew up on a working class neighborhood called Carolyn Drive, and all the dads were mill workers except my dad. So we had blue collars, and my dad, a Lutheran pastor, wore the white collar. And yeah, some people get the joke, some people don't. And so I spent summers of college working at a paper mill, and as county executive, I saved a paper mill, which is a subject of my book that was just released last week. And my life experience is a little bit different than Senator Johnson's. I worked on my uncle's farm baling hay. I bussed tables at a supper club, stocked shelves at the local grocery store. And, I have the life experience. I have a pretty good sense of what someone like me, a U.S. Senator, could affect and help working families, whether it's Medicare for all, whether it's a Green New Deal, whether it's pushing back and fighting bad trade deals that has cost a lot of jobs, not just in the Fox Valley, but across the state. And there really isn't, I think, more of a stark contrast in those terms, in a lot of other terms, with Ron Johnson, who in business and in politics was born with a silver spoon in his mouth.
Or a foot in his mouth, too.
Or wasn't it Ann Richards who said, the late, great Ann Richards, a silver foot in his mouth? So.
Silver foot in his mouth, exactly. That's of George H.W. Bush, if I recall properly.
Yes.
So this is interesting because, Wisconsin obviously has been a center point in national politics for many years. And obviously it's where the progressive movement, so many of our our previous union laws and the great protections workers have come out of Wisconsin and have been pulled back because the Koch brothers and others have invested so much to make Wisconsin the petri dish for their libertarian experiment. But the last couple of weeks, I've heard people call Wisconsin Republican because of Johnson, hearing about the words that he said. They say, well, he's from a conservative state. That's just not the case. Can you explain to folks what the makeup of Wisconsin really is like?
That's right. Well, let me make two comments. First of all, going back to the comment I said that he had a silver spoon in his mouth, not just in business because he is a billionaire son-in-law, but also in politics. I mean, he happened to get elected in 2010 and 2016, which were pretty good Republican years. And unfortunately, he defeated the great Senator Russ Feingold. And it's not lost on me that this is the seat of Russ Feingold, as well as Gaylord Nelson. But another thing we have to take into consideration, not a lot of people really talk about this, is even though that we have paper-thin margins, so it's been plus or minus about 20 to 30,000 votes. That was the margin that Trump won in 2016. That was a margin that Democratic Governor Tony Evers won in 2018, and President Joe Biden about 20,000 in last year. But I think what makes it so close is not the politics, but laws that have restricted voter access. If you look at the studies about what voter ID, you're looking at anywhere between 1 to 3 percentage points. So instead of, a state that's maybe plus or minus 1 point, it's actually, more blue than I think people give it credit for. And I think that that's a really big reason in that regard.
I was really surprised to learn that Milwaukee is the most segregated city in the country. It's a little bit, on one hand, it's surprising because it's a northern state, and I think folks would think of the Deep South being more segregated. But on the other hand, there has been so much investment by conservatives in restrictive voting laws in Wisconsin, as you just mentioned, and of course, making sure that people of color are not mobilized to the voting booth so that they can keep their power in Wisconsin. Why do Republicans care about Wisconsin so much as opposed to maybe some other states? Why was that their petri dish?
Right. And I think that's a great question. And I think there is a two-word answer, and that's the Bradley Foundation. I mean, that's one of the largest and possibly not oldest, but largest I wouldn't say a conservative organization, but a right-wing organization. And so they looked at Wisconsin, this is their home state, and they started making this goes back to the 1980s and the 1990s, where one step at a time, $1 at a time, one office holder at a time, they started doing those things. And that really is the MO of the conservative right-wing movement going all the way back to the 1970s. I mean, they created this little old legal club called the Federalist Society back in the late 70s, early 80s. And they were fine. I mean, they were fine waiting in a quarter of a century, 20, 25, 30 years. They knew that they would get there, and they did. And of all the states out there, Wisconsin really has been bearing the brunt of that experiment. But notwithstanding, this is a state with a very proud progressive tradition. And you have people who are carrying on that tradition, people like John Nichols, who is the correspondent for the Nation. And like I said before, you had Russ Feingold, and you also had the legacy of the modern modern day environmental movement with Gaylord Nelson. And I think that there's a lot of things that you can point to, both in terms of our roots and, and more recently, I really, really believe that there's a very strong and very durable progressive economic populist vein that runs through this state. It goes back to the progressive era, but you've also seen in a relatively strong labor movement that unfortunately has come upon hard times, but there are glimmers of hope. And that was the case in my book, recounting how the steelworkers local got together and saved a paper mill, a story that you don't see too often.
The paper mill is very important in Wisconsin. It's a huge industry. I remember when we were facing the toilet paper shortage just a year ago. I remember reading all these stories about how there were all these paper mills that were producing toilet paper in Wisconsin. They couldn't. It was right. Amazing to hear the stories behind this. But why were they pushing to shut down paper mill? What's happening there with the paper mills?
Well, that was just simply a case of a mom and pop paper mill that was 129 years old, 128 years old, and they just happened to come upon tough times. They had a business model that they were going to transition from the older white grades to the brown packaging grades, which of course is a very, very lucrative market considering all the shipping that is going on, all the e-commerce, especially during this pandemic. And what happened, it was this greedy bank, PNC Bank, that decided, you know what, we can call the note. We have all of this investment in other competitors of Appleton Coated, and we're going to pull the note because we can. And they started behaving like a payday lender. In the time between announcing the receivership and going through it, they were extracting $50,000 a day out of that paper mill penalties. Look, they had completely written us off, and we decided, you know what, we can do this. We took advantage of a little known law in Wisconsin, receivership law, which is kind of like bankruptcy. We prevailed on a local judge to give us a second chance. We showed that this business model could work, and it was hugely successful. And the epilogue to this, which I don't mention in the book, or actually I do, I think in the last chapter, is the scrap dealer that bought Appleton Coated that was going to scrap it until we said you can make money and we can bring back workers. They ended up flipping that mill 2 years later, making almost $80 million. Think about that. That industrial scrap dealer made $80 million essentially because a local union said, we have faith in our mill. It's been around here since 1889, and we're going to keep this going.
Has this been replicated anywhere else in Wisconsin or in other communities?
Yes, that's a good question. Last year, so this would have been about 2 years, 2 years after the Appleton Coated case, there was another mill. In this case, it was Flambeau River Paper in Park Falls, Wisconsin. That's about 3 hours away from here. It's the same thing. I think it was almost just as old as Appleton Coated. And we actually used, not only did we use the same strategies we did in Appleton Coated, the steel workers were there. So we did the same route of objecting to it. And we also used the former CEO as a consultant. So that's another example of how it was used. But that's a good question. Not only is it the example of receivership law, but it is the larger story is how a community can come together. And I propose a tripartite model of organized labor, local business, and local government coming together to improve the lives of their community, saving a mill. The same thing can happen in manufacturing, quite frankly, any other industry.
Before we get to your race, I'm curious, has anything transpired? Has there been any sort of progress since you've now had a Democratic governor? I mean, a few years ago, I covered the race for that. It was a very crowded field for governor, and it was palpable just how frustrated people were. For folks who may not recall, the legislature there was a huge storming of the Capitol, in a good way, I should say, with activists in Wisconsin, trying to reverse some of these horrible laws that, you know, Republicans have put on you. So there was an appetite, a very like palpable appetite for change. Do you feel like that's taken place, or there's been enough?
I think we are potentially looking at a third blue wave. I hate to jinx ourselves though, but I think the point you're trying to make, things are not all hunky dory. I mean, we still have a legislature where where we are in a deep minority. The Republicans are not at a supermajority. In fact, it is so severe that one of the strategies the state Democratic Party had last year was save the veto. And so the focus was to not allow for Republican supermajorities in both houses at the very least. They were successful. We were to, maintain a very deep minority. But as long as the legislature's in that position, you're right, it is palatable. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon.
You have a primary. And I saw this clip of your primary opponent. I'm actually not going to even set it up because I think he sets it up very well of who he is. But you do have an opponent. Let's play this clip real quick. I'd love to get your reaction.
I was excited by the fact that hey, we were possibly going to buy a basketball team. And to me, that was and I know for my dad, that was always a dream of his. I didn't know much about Milwaukee. I knew the Brewers, I knew the Packers were in Wisconsin. I had been to Wisconsin one other time. I went to Oshkosh to help volunteer for Hillary in the primary in 2008 with my sister. And that was it. My first time to Milwaukee was when we came to meet with Senator Cole about possibly purchasing the team. And, I came in with kind of trying to with just keeping an open mind about the city. The only places I'd lived in prior were New York, Philly, and DC. So, kind of bigger East Coast cities. Mm-hmm. And, when I came here, I think what most surprised me about Milwaukee is the fact that Milwaukee has all of the same things that any other city, especially any other big city, has.
Oh my God. Did he do this during the campaign? What?
All right. I mean, I'm not sure if I need a comment, though. Look, Alex is a friend. I got to know him pretty well when he arrived. I think it was, I'm not sure when it was, 6-7 years ago. We were actually connected because his intern advisor was one of my old roommates. So kind of a small world there. But, Alex, great guy. I've known him for some time. And I think that there are a lot of differences, both with regard to our background, I think what we bring to the race, and what we want to do in the U.S. Senate.
Fair enough. I think, what's revealed in that video is just not just being disconnected from the community, even if it's been 6 or 7 years, but just how he embraces the community. But I think you will have a comment on what Senator Johnson was caught saying a few days ago and how he's doubled down. Let's play that clip.
I knew those are people that love this country, that truly respect law enforcement, would never do anything to break a law. And so I wasn't concerned. Now, had the tables been turned, and Joe, this got me in trouble. Had the tables been turned and President Trump won the election, and those were tens of thousands of Black Lives Matter and Antifa protesters, I might have been a little concerned.
I mean, this has been getting so much national attention. Senate leadership has called him out. I mean, this is how is it playing on the ground in Wisconsin? That's
Yeah, I think that people are just furious, and it's not just Democrats or Democratic primary voters. It's just across the board. I mean, even Republicans are kind of looking at it they're just kind of looking away from this. It really is an embarrassment, but I don't think it's so. I mean, it is an embarrassment, but it's hurtful. It's wrong, and how it. It really hurts a lot of people. I think that that's kind of been lost in this whole debate. Yes, those were awful comments. Yes, it was embarrassing, though, but they were hurtful comments. And there's a lot of people in Wisconsin. There's a lot of people in Outagamie County that I think were really hurt by those. And I think this is all the more reason why he needs to resign. And I'm not just talking about sticking around to next year. If he's going to run, he's going to run. I mean, we are going to defeat him soundly. But I think for the good of the nation, the good of the state, he needs to resign, and he needs to resign now.
Are there other people calling for his resignation in Wisconsin?
We were the first ones shortly after the insurrection. I looked at them like, yep, we're done with this. This guy's got to resign. And of course, quite a few people followed up and, as they said, I mean, and rightfully so. But yeah, I mean, others are doing that. And I think it's important. I think it's important that it happens because you need to have a chorus of people who are saying the same thing, in this case, calling for a resignation. But, regardless if someone else is going to call for the resignation, I will continue to call on him to resign all the way up until Election Day.
And if you were to resign and say there was a chorus of Republicans, his colleagues, local Republicans, the Republican Party, whoever, Mitt Romney, that also called for him to resign, what happens next? Like, does the governor appoint somebody? How does this all play out?
That's a good question. I believe that the governor does not appoint someone, so I think that there would be a special election. That was the case, and this goes back many, many years after Joe McCarthy left the U.S. Senate, so we can start making comparisons with Joe McCarthy and Ron Johnson. I think that could be another 2 or 3 or 4 segments. So there was a special election, and the great Bill Proxmire won that seat, who is a legendary elected official here in Wisconsin. So he needs to resign.
And then there's the primary on each side, or is it just like a
right?
Okay, very interesting. So if he doesn't resign, what's next for your campaign? How are you guys? When is your primary date for the Democratic primary, and what can people do to help you out?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to continue to do this regardless, of what Senator Johnson does. I mean, we have a message. This has been a very, very effective campaign. We have been gaining support. We have quintupled followers on social media just in the last month or so. We're getting endorsements. People can come to our website, nelson4wi.com. The same thing for both Twitter and for Facebook. And this is a people-powered grassroots campaign. I don't have billions. I don't have billions. It's kind of like I'm living a Bernie Sanders stump speech, billionaires and millionaires. That's going to be the next 18 months of my life.
You were a Bernie delegate.
Yep, that's right.
All right. Thank you so much, Thomas Nelson, for joining us today. Go check out his website. We'll put it in the information section on our site, on YouTube and on Twitch. But in the meantime, good luck. What's that primary date again?
Second week in August.
Second week in August. Yep. There we go.
So we have an August primary. Yeah. So
Wisconsin
it's going to be a late primary.
Beautiful in the summertime.
It is.
My family used to go to Wisconsin Dells. Great memories for my family.
Oh, really? Well, that's good.
I was in Buffalo. Just like Buffalo in the summer.
All Wisconsin's beautiful all year long.
You're campaigning well. Take care, Thomas.
Thank you.
We will be right back with our extraordinary panel. We got to do a mashup of all these gaffes. I'm starting to feel like Joe Biden, but much, much, much younger. All right, everybody, we'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. I'm laughing because I'm reading the chat. And Francesca Fiorentini said, I muted myself because I read instructions.
I never read instructions. I'm trying to get better.
I'm impressed. Nobody reads the instructions on the show, clearly.
No. What's going on?
Can we be unmuted now?
Yes, Jamie, you're free. You're free. Let them be free.
I've been yelled at before.
All right. Francesca Fiorentini is, of course, the host of the Bitchuation Room podcast, New Time, and News Broke on Al Jazeera. And Jamie Peck is the co-host of the Antifada podcast. Everyone knows you guys. I don't even know why I have to introduce you, but it's important. Something going on with my hair. It's like there's like a big, I didn't brush my hair today. It's like a knot that's just.
It's volume. Chalk it up to volume.
Keep going like this. It's funny because I don't know if since it's Fun Friday, I might as well just lean in on this. If you ever have like a really good hair day, like yesterday I had my hair, I did a news hit. And so someone did my hair for me and I just didn't want to brush it after that. So I'm trying to keep it together. It's not working. All right, let's get serious here. I want to start off with the most important news this week. The most shocking, jarring news this week is, of course, the attacks that we woke up to a few days ago that occurred in Atlanta. A misogynistic madman, murderer, of course, targeting Asian women in particular, but the Asian community, and using the excuse of he had sexual problems, and of course that being reinforced through the sheriff's department. But I really wanted to have a conversation in this space because I think many people are learning, and they should be learning about how deep rooted this is. I was listening to a report yesterday with there's a lawmaker, I think it's Representative Wynn in Georgia, who was talking about how difficult it has been for her to get attention for reform around what designates a hate crime. And like, it's just fallen on deaf ears for whatever reason. Francesca, I know you've been, you've been speaking out quite a bit about this over the last few days. Misogyny, racism with misogyny goes hand in hand. I mean, this must be incredibly traumatizing for you in particular, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm Chinese. I'm half Chinese. I got a lot of Asian elders in my life and my loved ones. And I was out walking the other day and I saw a couple of Asian elders walking with giant sticks. And let me tell you, I've seen them before. They didn't used to have giant sticks, but they are ready for action. So Don't F with them because they will F with you. So yeah. In terms of the hate crime thing, it's a bigger issue that I'm not qualified, I think, to speak properly on. But I think that in this country, we have an incredibly narrow definition of what a hate crime is. And I think it speaks to a larger problem about our criminal justice system generally, and obviously gun violence broadly. There's just a lot of issues that are a lot of things that are not classified as hate crimes, and like, what's the difference? I mean, really, within a system of white supremacy, within racist policing, like, it's all a giant hate crime. So I mean, the hate crime language, I feel like, was developed in like the 80s and 90s. Like, we are way beyond that now, and it's so much more of a systemic issue, which is sort of what I really keep on coming back to and looking at some of the Asian-led organizations that do incredible like anti-gentrification work, like housing work, homelessness work, all this great stuff. And they don't see these instances as separate from broader struggles against policing, for justice, and for also like a Black Lives Matter movement, which I think is so important right now. So yeah, lots of thoughts on that.
It's interesting because the response in New York, in particular, Jamie, you live in New York, was to beef up the police, like bring in the police who just really understood the issue so well when they got up and spoke.
Oh my God. Yeah. I actually did a stream last night with my friend, Rachel Oyster Kim, who is an Asian woman, as well as a sex worker and an activist around sex workers' rights and abolition. And we really dug into a lot of the reasons why our current front runner for mayor, Andrew Yang, is wrong when he says the answer to anti-Asian violence is to put more cops in the subways. I mean, just recently, an Asian woman died trying to climb out the window when the cops raided the massage parlor where she worked in Queens. So if you think about the ways that these kinds of hateful acts intersect with misogyny, anti-Asian racism, and whorephobia around sex workers, because whether or not these women actually were sex workers, Asian women working in massage parlors are associated with sex workers. You can see it very quickly that the racist, misogynistic, rapey cops are maybe not the best thing to throw at this problem.
It's also the same week that I'm thinking about, the woman Sarah Everard, who was allegedly murdered. I mean, the case hasn't been closed, right? But a police officer is charged with her murder in the UK, in London. And the answer there has been, we got this pilot program. We're going to throw a bunch of cops, plainclothes cops in nightclubs to make sure that women are safe. Like, cool plan, bro. I'm sure that's going to work out real well. Like, it's mind boggling. And there need to be more women. As someone who's like, ultimately, we need to dismantle these structures. I'm also like, I just also need to see more women in positions making these decisions. Yeah. Andrew Yang's a horrible example of how representation is not actually always a good thing. This is a guy who wrote an op-ed that was like, look, Asians, we just need to prove our Americanness to the world, to this country. Just, go out there with your, your flags and your red, white, and blue and let everyone know that they shouldn't be afraid of you. And it's just like, no, F you forever if that's your response.
I said it last night and I'll say it again. I am a police abolitionist, except for the Yang Gang. They are a dangerous gang.
Careful.
They must be stopped.
Oh my God. They come for you. I have all these comments, people saying, we love your show, but like, we just don't see you haven't given us the evidence against Andrew Yang yet. I'm like, what more evidence do you want than this? Honestly, he's not a socialist guy. He's not, if he could run his campaign off of crypto, he would. And who knows where that money would be coming from? My God.
He's the best kind of libertarian, the kind that loves cops.
Yes, exactly. God. He's like, defund the police and then replace it with Brock Pierce and his crypto gang. I don't know, whatever his strategy is.
He's going to outsource police work. It'll be a whole, which at this point, I'm like, might as well try it.
Yeah, because it'll fail and then we won't have it. Great idea.
No, it's just going to be a bunch of those like killer dog robots from the last season of Black Mirror with like a big Google logo on the side. That's going to be great.
Exactly.
But you know what? They are not good at opening doors. So we got that on them.
Yes. Well, the problem is they'll shoot through the door. That's the bigger issue. All right. So I want to bring up Representative Jimmy Gomez from California has introduced a resolution to expel Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Congress over her repeated her repeated endorsements of sedition, domestic terrorism, and political violence. But okay, makes sense, right? Like, why not? Why is this controversial? I don't understand. But Nancy Pelosi is like, oh, that's his view. We don't feel that. We don't feel that way. They went into your office, stole your laptop.
Oh, that rules.
They missed you by like a half a second.
Remember Nancy? Remember that video? Nancy,
yeah.
where are you?
I love that so much. No, this is literally the last scene, spoiler alert, in the Purge election year when the Hillary Clinton character, like her whole family was murdered. The fascists, they tried to kidnap her. They tried to murder her multiple times. They almost murdered her again, like on a stage in a weird like church place. And finally, like the cool black anarchists rescue her, which they probably shouldn't have done. But she goes up to the fascist guy, like the new founding fathers, real Josh Hawley energy. And she goes, I'm going to beat you so bad in November.
That's exactly what this is. It's like, excuse me, I'm going to go create we're going to have a process that we're going to talk about. And this is exactly what this is.
Just like civility, like as you're being choked. Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they need cops. That's what they need. She needs a cop to stand up to him. I don't know. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Well, she should call her friend Kamala. No, like there are people who say, oh, well, we shouldn't be so hard on these right-wing insurrectionists because then they're going to use the same stuff on the radical left. There's no ombudsman out there making sure that the right and the left get treated the same. Like there's no one in the history of this country saying, oh, we need to be fair to the communists who want to overthrow this country and treat them exactly the same as the people on the far right.
Right.
Like too late for treating like leftists the way that that's been going on, dude. There's FBI files about the Raging Grannies, a group of singing pacifist grannies that go out to anti-war demonstrations. Like, what have we been doing with the FBI?
They follow them to like McDonald's. I mean, I've talked to folks who've like found their family members' FBI files, and what they depict is like, she went to the nail salon today. Well, she went and walked nothing. It's unreal.
Like the FBI agent who's been assigned to Noam Chomsky since the 60s just makes his fourth visit of the day to Panera Bread.
It's exactly it.
That dude's going to publish a memoir when Chomsky finally eventually does die, although I can't even think about that. And I'm going to hate it. And I'm going to troll the shit.
Someone knock on some wood, please. Everybody knock on wood. I have no wood around me.
No, I've got tons of wood.
Good. All right. So this is very strange to me because I don't know why we keep having to vote on this, but once again, Congress voted on the Violence Against Women Act, which of course Joe Biden likes to say he's the author of. Just reminding everyone, if you didn't know, Andrew Cuomo bad, and that is why I was the author of the Violence Against Women Act. But let's roll the clip of this vote because.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act, and I want to thank my colleague from Houston, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, for her leadership and her tireless efforts to get this critical legislation to this House floor. The Violence Against Women Act provides essential support for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and its reauthorization now is vitally important, as many of my colleagues have shared. It's critical for organizations in my community that support survivors, like the Houston Area Women's Center, which has reported a dramatic rise in requests for their services through the coronavirus pandemic. More than 6,000 more calls responded to in 2020 alone. In 2020, the number of people the center sheltered tripled. Sadly, we've been reminded again today of the dangers that women face in our society. The Violence Against Women Act provides resources and services that are life-saving. That's why I'm proud to co-sponsor this legislation and to vote in support of it today. I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, and I yield back.
I'm no procedural expert, but I just don't understand why some legislation has expiration dates and others don't. And you know, back when this was originally signed in '94 by Bill Clinton, it went to the Supreme Court. There was a provision in it that said that accusers could sue their, you know, whether they're rape victims or domestic abuse victims. But the court said that the federal government did not have the power to make sure that women or victims are able to sue the people who violated their bodies and hurt them in any way. So, you know, that's an aspect of this. But what I don't understand is like, what is it about these types of bills that have to be renewed and reauthorized? And we just have to keep having the same conversations over and over again over things that, you know, in Europe.
Men are getting better. Oh my God. Men are getting better. We had Me Too. We did it. Yay. No, I don't know. I mean, you could apply this to the Supreme Court too. You're like, I truly don't understand why we relitigate it in the Supreme Court every 5 years, 10 years. Just amend the Constitution forever and ever and ever. That's what I want. But I guess connecting this to our earlier conversation, I do think that the Violence Against Women Act, coming off the back of this week of, you know, Asian American women being murdered in massage parlors that may or may not perform sex work, like the fact that group of folks and sex workers generally, as Jamie mentioned, have been invisibilized. I mean, Asian women are already invisibilized. Workers are already invisibilized for so much of their work. You combine that and just like, we need this act and we need way more, and we need to stop with the like SESTA FOSTA BS around like, you know, lumping in sex work with trafficking, et cetera. Like, we're just beyond that at this point. So I can't help but thinking the ways that sometimes these prevention acts they're so important, but they're also so narrow. So narrow. Exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying is if they has to be re-upped every decade or whatever the provision says, you never have these deeper, more complicated conversations at times when literally like this week, we needed to have that conversation and it needed to be like screamed from the floor of Congress. Jamie.
Well, I'm actually glad that we're having a conversation about this again, especially amid the movement for abolition, because the original Violence Against Women Act was part of the 1994 crime bill, which, as we know, contributed to mass incarceration, particularly of oppressed communities, particularly working class Black men. I just watched the Woody Allen documentary on HBO. Turns out different rules apply if you're a rich white guy. And I believe the answer to that disparity is not putting more white people in prison, but abolishing prison for everyone and transforming the conditions that lead to this kind of harm in the first place. I think it's very interesting that Joe Biden said, he released a statement and he talked about how he championed the original Violence Against Women Act as part of this very carceral crime bill and said, even as I was told time and time again that domestic violence was a family issue that should be left to families to address in private. And what I say is those are not the only two choices. It's not just a choice between, oh, it's a family issue in private, no one does anything about it. Oh, we do stuff about this by locking up poor Black men, right? Like it is, in fact, a community issue, and it can only really be dealt with effectively by community models of accountability that have been shown to work much better than the bourgeois justice system if the goal is actually to keep people safe. And as we know, the system we have now does a terrible job protecting people from gendered violence, particularly trans women and sex workers. And in fact, there's an organization called Survived and Punished that was founded because a lot of victims of domestic abuse wind up being charged with a crime themselves after they report it.
Yeah. What was the name of the organization?
Survived and Punished.
And they're based in New York?
I believe so.
Okay, check it out. Yeah, I mean, and it's really interesting because like in New York, there's some statistics, but they're not, incredibly accurate in New York in particular about how many women who stayed obviously in domestic violence situations. The laws in New York are very strict in that, like if a woman illustrates, or anybody, I should say, illustrates that they might potentially be in a situation of domestic violence, the police are forced to come and deal with it, whether or not the victim or supposed victim actually asked for it. And what happens as a result is, the person could get arrested. They could, the DA takes over the case, and there is a forced
get reported to ICE.
Reported to ICE, but also the victim now has to find housing. And so there's a situation in which, if you are in a 2-income household or 1-income household, or you have kids, or, think of all the millions of ways your life has been disrupted. And I don't know. I mean, it's mind blowing to me that they didn't think that through in advance. And they see that so many women do stay in these situations because of the being financially tethered to a partner and their children as well. So it's a housing justice issue. It's an issue of income inequality. I mean, we could go through this, jobs justice, everything.
Amen to all that. I just love, it's hard because I feel like we're in two worlds. I felt this for a while. We're like in the future and in the past. We have these Republicans who vote against things like the Violence Against Women Act. And you have again, white elitist bourgeois feminism that even Republican women buy into because they're wealthy enough to be able to afford a hotel if they're being brutalized by a partner, or they're wealthy enough to go to their parents' house, whatever the situation may be. They have the line of don't rely on the government. The government wants to make women, reliant on them, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, I get everything from my dad. And that's the past. And then the future is sort of like what gives me hope, what Jamie lays out is really imagining, and especially when it comes to, when people talk about how perpetrators of some of the anti-Asian violence were African-American, and, we talk about, situations of intimate violence or partner violence or child sexual abuse, right? Oftentimes we don't want to see, and victims don't want to see their brutalizers or their assaulters locked up forever. That's not the solution. And yet when we have carceral solutions, when we have police solutions, that's what it becomes. And so, organizations that work around this kind of stuff always are looking at transformative and restorative justice alternatives. But again, we're still caught in this BS right-wing paradigm too.
Final thoughts, Jamie?
I mean, sadly, it's not only a right-wing paradigm. I think this has been taken up by a whole bunch of liberals as well. And, talk about conflating sex trafficking and sex work. We have people like Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore, like mainstream, famous Hollywood liberals doing ads for these people who are pushing policies that only lead to sex workers dying. Like, I'm sorry, there are not two sides to this issue. It has been settled for a very long time. So we really need to be, and yes, there is a role the state can play. It can distribute resources to community groups that provide crucial services for people like food and shelter without being tied to the carceral state that is only going to hurt people and not help them.
And divide families up. Yeah. Survived and punished. There it is. Thanks, Dorsey. Appreciate that. All right, ladies. Thank you. Thanks for joining for Femme Friday. We love you. Jamie Peck, Francesca Fiorentini. Are you got anything to plug right now? Or
thanks for having me.
We're a quick an hour show.
I will have a new show to plug soon, but right now I've got my old show still. Patreon.com/theantifada. I'm very proud of the work we've been doing lately. And we've also been streaming like 4 nights a week, twitch.tv/theantifada. So check that out too if you want to actually see us while you're listening to us talk.
Do you look at the camera when you're doing it, or is it just like you're looking at like you're the Joe Rogan thing or whatever?
Oh, it's just like me sitting in front of my laptop. So I look at the camera and then it's almost like I'm looking at everyone that I'm talking to. And everyone watching, it's almost
it's
a nice simulacrum of human contact.
Simulacrum.
I love those other shows where
right now.
Dorsey, definitions.
Yeah, put that on screen, please.
And he's asking what time we stream. Usually at 7 p.m. Eastern. Sometimes we start a little later at like 8. You got to follow the Antifada Twitter account to see exactly when we have overcome our technical difficulties.
That's exactly the situation. I did that last night on here and I was like, oh my God, I appreciate Dorsey so much. Francesca,
King.
what are you promoting right now?
Oh, just the Bitchuation Room podcast every Sunday. We changed it. It's earlier now, 5-8 Eastern, so that I have time to edit and get to bed. And yeah, check that out. Listen to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And it's so good to be on with Jamie. Jamie, I've never actually been on a show with you, I don't think.
Really?
And hello. And I hope we connect more. So anyway,
it's really nice. It's good to be on with you too.
I love you guys too. Okay.
All right. And then Nomiki, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. It's the threesome where we see Nomiki out. I'm sorry. It's Friday.
I'm so exhausted today. I got to tell you, my brain is foggy. So I'm really glad that we had amazing guests because I'm moving at a snail's pace. My brain is not operating at the normal speed. So
no worries. Wait, I thought we were going to talk about Matthew McConaughey.
Oh, let's do it. Wait, do you want 5? Let's do it. Okay, fine.
I had one terrible thing I was going to say about him.
All right, let's
only one.
Well, maybe more than one.
But you're referring to Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah,
he's running, or he's thinking about running for governor, right?
Thinking about running for governor of Texas. No one knows what his politics are. I just hope they're not alt-right. Do not laugh at that. That was terrible.
I loved it because you did it.
You gotta do it. That is that's the perfect joke.
Well, thank you.
Perfect. All right. On that note, we're out.
Bye.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everybody in the chat chiming in on a day where I felt like my brain was not moving at a normal pace. I didn't even brush my hair. Clearly, I was not on top of it today. All right. Lots of YouTube shout outs and Twitch shout outs. Biped Snake. Thank you for subscribing at the tier 1 on Twitch. Very appreciative. Pete from Oakland, do you know if the colonial territorial status of Guam and Samoa are comparable to that of Puerto Rico? If that's the temperature for Pacific, okay, got it. For Pacific decolonization. Also, I'm the guy who finally signed up for the book club yesterday. Thank you. 1 book per month because I'm a full-time undergrad student. Oh, wow. With a to-read list of 40 books high. Oh, my goodness. Happy Femme Friday. Much love. Great question. So there is a book that I read in November called How to Hide an Empire. Let's just add that to the books as well. You make it 41. How to Hide an Empire is, what's his name? Daniel, I forgot his last name, but you can find it. It's a new book that came out. And they talk about how the American empires worked and everything from Alaska, colonial status with all these different territories. And Guam is a really big piece of it. There's a part where they talk about, each chapter has a different region. They're all comparable in that they've all been colonized, but I think Puerto Rico in particular is, in this situation, they have such a large population on the mainland. I think 2 million plus Puerto Ricans, and they're so integrated in our government. I mean, there are similarities, but then there are also the horrifying things have happened in all of these territories. They were testing, experimenting on citizens of Puerto Rico on the island over the last 100 years, whether it's pharmaceuticals or doctors, basically forcing sterilizations because they're just racist and they did not want people to reproduce. So there's been a lot of, they literally killed the independence movement of Puerto Rico. So the history and what this means and signifies, I think that's where the difference probably lies. But I definitely recommend reading the book. It's such a great read, such a great read. Okay, Ken M. Thank you for the love. Prairie Fire Kowalski from Nebraska. Tomorrow is the start of spring with the equinox. We made it through the darkest winter in living memory. Wow. As the world recovers, remember those who didn't care about others and lives they cut short, including Donald Trump and the response to this horrible, horrible, horrible pandemic. All right. Marty Hunt sends his love. Thank you very much. And anonymous gifter. I love that. Irish Ming. And I talk at teacher. I think that's what it says. I talk a teacher on Twitch. Thanks for subscribing. All right, everybody. Oh, we have a few more. Just kidding. Daniel Castle says, call Lance, go on surfs, please. You know what? I didn't see an email. And so I have to respond to him. That's on my list of things to do today. I'm just sharing everything with you today. Open book. On my to-do list is to call Lance from the surfs. We're going to set up a time. I will definitely be there. All right. Everybody else, Professor Harvey Kaye, thank you so much for always mixing it up in the chats. He was on yesterday. If you missed his interview, go back and watch. It was so good. Midi Docs and Mario, thank you for working the algorithms as usual. And our moderators, Bob C. Chokin, The Orb, and Chuck Diesel. We love you. And of course, over at Twitch, Dorian Sapiens, A Difficult Truth, Nightbot, Our Means, Nug Wrangler. Really grateful to you for keeping the chat room troll free. The chat's troll free. I told you, I'm like my brain's not working. Chat room. We're not in chat rooms. We're not in like an AOL chat room. All right. Thank you to everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. I'm going to get some sleep. Dorsey should too, because he didn't sleep well either. So maybe it's like the moon or something keeping us up. But I'm going to go get some sleep and hopefully I'll be well rested for Tuesday right here, 3 p.m. Eastern. Stay in solidarity. Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.